So I'm going to have Abby run through the agenda and get into some of our slides, but essentially, as I'm sure you all know, we passed our strategic plan at our last board meeting, so now the work begins. So all of those milestones that we put together as a committee are now stuff that we get to actually work on. I know, even though I am leaving, I'm very excited to get this started. And just as a reminder, and I think it's on the 21st, Abby, am I right? We have a board meeting, it'll be virtual. It'll be probably shorter than usual, but just to talk about the transition of me leaving, and update everyone on progress on the strategic plan. Abby and I are meticulous about tracking and making sure that we're hitting everything that we said we're going to do, and making sure that it's very clear and organized. So it'll just be a relatively quick meeting, but we invited all the committees as well, just because we figured it would be relevant to you as well. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. But today I will work on two different milestones, but I'm going to pass it over to Abby to do agenda and start the slides.
Just, I think you all should have received the invite. It's on the 20th, so Thursday the 20th, not the 21st, but very close. Okay, so as Tori mentioned, for today, we're going to start diving into some of the milestones within the strategic plan. So obviously referencing the allocation that the board received for the New American Sport Network. So we're just going to talk in general about the current network that we have or don't have, what you all are looking for in the network that we look to build. And then Tori and I, with the help of the Department of Labor and folks in the governor's office, have drafted up an RFP for this vendor. And so we just want some feedback from all of you on some high level points of what we're looking for the vendor. So that's what we're going to be going over today. And that should take up all of our time. So I'll go ahead and share my screen if anybody has any questions before I do that. Great. Great. Can you all see it?
Yep.
Great.
So first, we've got two kind of parallel tracks, if you remember from the one pager the committee's working on. There's the New American Support Network, which we're going to talk about second. So I want you to just kind of like divorce those two things from your mind for a second. And then overall, I'm going to say system, even though I don't believe there's one that exists, the relocation recruitment system in Vermont. And so when we're talking about mile markers, I just want to remind you, like, if we say, so like this one's by July of 2023, this is like step one in kind of us developing more of a formal system. So just if you have questions, go back and reference the one pager. It kind of shows you the full thing that we outlined. So the milestone we're working on today is by July 2023, the Relocation Recruitment Committee will clearly define guiding principles that will help all new and current Vermonters in a streamlined relocation and recruitment system. So today, all we're talking about are kind of the guiding principles of what we would like in an ideal world for a system to be. So for this section, we're just really going to be brainstorming. And then because it's a smaller group today, I think it will make sense that we'll have another meeting to kind of formalize what these are. But today is really just to brainstorm kind of, if we're talking perfect world, what our guiding principles are going to be. The second piece of this, which will be the next slide after that, we'll then talk about the scope of work for the New American Relocation Network. I know it's kind of complicated, but this just for in general, don't think just New Americans. This is just relocation in general. So I like to start off, and I felt like this has been good with some of our other committees that are doing some similar efforts, to just start with, again, it can be just single words like word association. What are the current perceptions of Vermont's relocation and recruitment efforts?
I would say fragmented and mostly geographically based versus what seems to be a comprehensive statewide system. So
don't be shy. Just what comes to mind.
I would just say that I think the current perceptions of the relocation recruitment efforts are not great. I guess, I know that we've talked about this before, but, prior to COVID, there were funding for various chambers to do some kind of outreach on the recruitment side as well as the relocation side. There were programs that were introduced over these past couple of years from the state of Vermont. And I just kind of feel like that's all a bit kind of gone away, which would be great to have it back.
Okay. Other thoughts?
When it works, I mean, there's some process, and when it works, what I love about it is that it kind of is very personal. It leverages, what works for a rural place, which is personal touch.
I would say it's a little amorphous, that people don't really understand what the efforts are or what's available.
Well,
Yeah.
go ahead, Pat.
Underfunded comes to mind too, and general, and like back to your point, John, but also I had reached out on the state's 10,000 grant program and thinking, oh, let's, is there a way we could tie that to, adult non-traditional students coming to Vermont, and we're all out of money, so it's underfunded in general, whether it's support or those relocation grants. And another thing that comes to mind is difficult. I mean, the housing problem makes this very difficult. And so I know we're not talking about housing, but it's going to be hard to attract people if we have no place for them to live. So, yeah.
What about just taking a step back as well? I guess it's mixed perceptions of actually the idea of more people coming to Vermont.
That's a good point. I mean, there are people who don't want to see folks in migrating, but then you have a whole employer population screaming for more people. So somehow, I'll go back. This is where my age is helping, but like, I think it was at least 20 years ago where the Lake Champlain Chamber, one of the Leadership Champlain projects was, I can summarize it only as a Smile Vermont, like how do we get Vermonters to embrace travelers from out of state, folks that are relocating, and help them understand there's value to having new blood and additional taxpayers and shoppers. And so, yeah, I think, some sort of a educational, well, I'm moving on to what would it look like, but there is that sort of, Flatlander go home mentality still, and especially I'm in the kingdom, and you can feel that fairly often, but I think also there's an appreciation for what visitors bring, but is there an appreciation for what new residents bring?
So let's dive into that a little deeper, because I think as we go through this, that population, there's a piece of messaging that's going to be required for people there's going to be some people that don't want anyone to come ever, no matter what we do. But there's a population of people that I think if we're able to communicate the value it will have to them, then we'll be able to kind of at least make them not hate people moving here. So I just want to dive into a little bit about I'm sure it's not, any of these are not obvious, but kind of the why people don't want new folks to come here. I know one is obviously it makes it more expensive, or at least a perception that'll make it more expensive.
Yeah, can I share? So I also think there's an assumption by people not familiar with the way the work is done about who is coming in. So, the two best success stories of our relocation efforts, they both happen to be actually Puerto Rican backgrounds. One is a health careers professional who data scientist who's now running a DEI consultancy, and the other is the head of community engagement for our new refugee resettlement organization. And I remember the assumption is, we're just paying more white yuppies to move here. And so I think there's a real misunderstanding of it's not just the value that anyone can bring. It's that like the actual people who it is benefiting and who are coming to our communities is more aligned with what the naysayers would want to see than what they even recognize, I think.
So
and it's part of
perhaps-
his classism. It's like, oh, only people rich enough to move are white people. And so it's like only white people are remote workers. And it's like, actually, industry outside of Vermont is more diverse. And it's yeah. So I think that is something I've heard and noticed is a lot of bad assumptions about who we're welcoming in, regardless of how we're doing it.
And I would add to that, not only who are we welcoming in, but at what level. Alex, you just mentioned two, I would say senior management type people, but are we looking to really educate the people on what the program is about? Are we looking to bring in people that are not just, turn out to be white and can afford it, but have the talents to be managers, but also have the skills to be workers who are looking to elevate their lives? So bringing in, from the culinary hospitality side, bringing folks in to work in the kitchens, what other opportunities can we give them to get people who really want to come and work? We recently had a couple J1 folks who came, and we got housing put together for them. And one morning we went in to check on them. They didn't show up, and they just decided to go on a walkabout the country, which is what they do at the end of the trip, but not at the beginning of their trip. So they weren't qualified well enough.
Other thoughts?
I was just going to comment that, obviously you hear when you kind of said, what some people think, they don't want change. So when out-of-staters come, regardless of race or ethnicity or anything like that, if they start to try to influence their local experiences or environment with things that they are bringing with them, some Vermonters just don't like that and reject that profusely and just say, don't change my world.
Yes.
Remain the same way. And, I think you probably find more kind of ingrained Vermonters having that kind of mentality than any of the other things that we're kind of talking about. And to me, I think it also is very regional. Like when you folks are kind of talking about like managers coming here on a relocation perspective, when you think about Manchester specifically in this area, we're talking about workforce that, as well as servers and bussers and dishwashers and cashiers and those kind of positions, that we would love to be able to bring people to Vermont to fill those types of roles. And that's a challenge to get because of the affordability, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think you all have hit, and to some degree I think there's a fear when there are new people coming in, fear that housing costs are going to go up, fear that maybe they're not the right people as they would define them. I think our history has shown we're not necessarily the friendliest to, the immigrant workers who come on a seasonal basis, or like even our farm workers who come. And, there have been whole systems set up to try to support those folks. But at the same time, you can't stereotype everyone. Some people are, very good to immigrant workers and others. But I think it's driven a lot by fear and the fear that, yeah, you're going to come and bring your New Jersey attitude and you're going to want to, mall on every corner and don't bring what you moved away from. So I think we've got to help people understand that, yeah, well, we have land use laws, we have process here that, things don't happen so that way. But I think a lot of it's rooted in fear, or maybe even a little bit of jealousy too.
I'm going to riff
go
on that just for a second, just to say, I think a little bit of kind of what Pat's saying is just really helpful. Is like people have fears that are just based in very like gut things, and they're based in kind of a fantasy of history. Oh God, what wonderful retired legislator who, sort of educated me about things like the orphan trains. He's like, there was a time, in economic crisis when, like, in order to get like the crops in, farmers were, and the population, a lot of outmigration to the West, farmers were like accepting orphans from, the cities to help them like get the crops in, like, and that, a lot of Vermont has been built in figuratively and literally, by immigrants from Italy. And so there's this kind of like weird Disney-fied, whiteified misunderstanding of Vermont's own history that's almost in many ways made by a lot of the back to the landers and their imposed view and oversimplification of Vermont's actual evolution and history, which was much more interesting and diverse and weird than their kind of version of it. And I think and then there's like this misunderstanding of history. And I think this misunderstanding also of just the economy, like there's a fantasy that we can do without this and that there's no repercussions to failing to fix this. And, that has to be sort of taken on. And I think that that's obviously not simple, but people have to have a basic understanding of how the economy works, that when you show up, when you can't get an appointment, for X, Y, and Z, that is related to the fact that we don't have a working population to do those tasks anymore. When someone can't come plow your driveway, when your parent who's in nursing care is not being properly taken care of overnight, that's a workforce problem.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, that it's communicated, like they say in political campaigns, like, people don't vote for the best candidate, they vote for the candidate who communicates their value to you the best. And I think that's the same idea here, that, we don't just want people to relocate to Vermont for the sake of relocating to Vermont. It's that we're all going to be better for it. And that it would take millions of people for us to look like New Jersey, to Pat's point. So I think there's a way, again, like, there's some people that just do not want anyone else to come here. But I think there's some people that could understand why it's valuable and get behind why something like that would be valuable to them. So it's like good to keep in the back of our minds kind of like what those pain points are as we're moving forward. Switching gears a little bit, I think this is going to kind of be a twofold, but I guess we can start with just in general, if we were to have a perfect relocation recruitment system, what would we like it to be? What would we want it to be like?
I think,
if I could, this might polarize those who are against ethnic population coming into Vermont, but would it be helpful or a good tool? The CCRP grant system that's going through right now is a very clear prioritization of awards being given to the first rounds are all going to women or people of color. And that might be an interesting fact to put in as part of, hey, come to Vermont. We really support you because look at what we are doing and what we've already done.
And I think, Jen, you said something about it being personal. I think that a really good relocation system is going to be something's, hey, welcome to Vermont writ large, but also welcome to this neighborhood, welcome to this community, and making those community connections. When I moved to Bennington years ago and a welcome wagon basket showed up on my porch, I was like, oh my God, whoa, somebody knows I'm new, and it felt good. Plus coupons and other things that would get you out trying things in the area. And that has to be because there was somebody that had personal knowledge that I was new to that neck of the woods. So I think that's really important. And I think that's also very Vermont, like neighbor reaching out to neighbor. So.
Yeah, like local.
And it was funny, like at one of the town meetings that I go to, they really celebrate the births. And I haven't seen this at every town meeting, but I think it's Guilford, and they make a really big deal of like talking about the families that have had babies that year and really kind of, and I think that's wonderful because they're really trying to celebrate like embracing population growth from within. But I think in the same way we could, come up with practices that feel both very Vermont and very appropriate and very community based, but also kind of celebrate welcoming people into our community, not just by being born here. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
town
see-
reports that would list births, wasn't there? Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Alex.
So I
Also, I
see. I don't know
apologize if
it's-
you can hear the like absolute downpour that's coming behind me, but hopefully it does.
Not yet. Well, that's good news if there's rain coming, I guess, huh?
No, I have a concert tonight. I can't have rain.
Okay, no rain, rain, get it out of your system right now. So, yeah.
So what I see, and again, all of my comments are really contextualized by refugee resettlement because that's my little window. But I won't even say coordination, but an understanding across agencies and up and down, like not just at the state level, but at the regional level, that like this is something that is invested in, and so that like you should expect to see new and different kinds of people coming into your local labor office, whether they're English language learners or they're used to the Massachusetts Department of Labor system. You know, it doesn't need to be around someone's ethnic background. It could just be like, here's how we know they do it in California, but here's how we do it in Vermont. And like, if you need to file or enroll your kid in a program or blah, 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 that kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm thinking like structure throughout the state, right? Like infrastructure throughout the state and connection, but hyper local as it pertains to a lot of like the like interfacing with the customer or whoever would be coming.
Yeah, and I think that kind of somebody mentioned like the welcome wagon and various programs like that that either exist or used to exist in their heyday. I think that's the kind of thing, and that can be, you know, funds can be given back to these regional chambers and stuff to set up these programs, because every county, as we know in this state, is really kind of different from one another, and it's not one's better than the other. They just offer different things to people that are relocating to the area, and giving them the ability to market and support people relocating to their area is great. And of course, then on a holistic, you know, overall state approach, there has to be a marketing effort that goes out about how welcoming we are and what a great place it is to live. I mean, without that, you're not really going to attract many people. And of course, if they can throw some money at helping people relocate through dollars, even better.
Yeah, so just for context there, it's a little off topic, but just so you're aware, we did not get the money we requested for relocation assistance this year from the legislature. You win some, you lose some. It's unfortunate, but there's still some of that money that's being spent as we speak. What we did get though, and it won't perfectly fit what you're talking about, we did get an extra $1 million to tourism and marketing. It's like a 60-40 split. I don't remember which one is which, but one is so that we can actually give money to local entities again. So some chambers, some RDCs, depends on who kind of does it for their area, to assist with some of this relocation stuff, because we haven't been able to in the past. So that will be available. I don't know exactly when. We have an implementation conversation this afternoon, so I probably know more then. But then also a chunk of that to do more marketing, to increase our marketing budget, which is still smaller than probably what's necessary, but incrementally moving in the right direction. So just so you're aware, some of that stuff's coming down the pike, but we won't be working with the relocation assistance money at least until after next July. So just for folks' awareness.
And
Yeah.
I just want to see real quickly, like, to give you a sense of what that looks like. Like, I spend 1 to 2 hours a week on the phone with people who are brought in by the marketing funnel of like whatever the state is doing, but then need to connect with someone regionally. And so through those, like, I'm talking every week with 1, 2, 3, 4 people who want to move to Vermont. So, and I think that it's just important for people to understand what that looks like. You know, what was just described by Tori.
Yeah. Yeah, because for those who don't know how it works right now, it's basically like the top of the funnel is our state marketing effort. And then it's like you fill out Connect a Vermonter and you get sent to one of the regional entities that contracts with the state. But we haven't been able, they are just doing it with that. We haven't been paying them to do it. So we're making moves in the right direction there in some respects.
But I just
Any
want
other-
to say
go
that
ahead.
I don't get, I mean, the people, there's no, all the things we're talking about, you know, the reason for this committee is it's a workforce board committee, and I'm not getting people who are contacting us who fit with the jobs we have. It's fine. Some of them do-ish. Many of them can carry their work with them or are flexible. But I mean, realistically, you know, I'd love to be seeing half or more of the calls that we get align with the actual occupational needs of our region. And that's a level of commitment, detail, connection that is not possible without like consistent, back to Pat's point, without consistent funding and kind of an intelligence about the economic side of this.
Right. And some targeted
Yeah.
marketing, right, to specific sectors, specific industries. That's some of the work I think we're hoping to do with it. Again, $600,000 is not, it's nothing. It's probably less than UVM's marketing budget, but it like will do more in terms of like not just randomly getting people who like Vermont, but getting someone who likes Vermont and is also a nurse, and who likes Vermont and is also would work in a kitchen. Like, you know, starting to do some of that like hyper targeted marketing, because I think you're right. We can bring people in, but then if there's a job mismatch, it doesn't necessarily directly address our workforce needs. So noted. Any other thoughts on kind of our hopes and dreams for a relocation recruitment system?
Yeah, I've got a couple. Oops. Sorry, my dog is under my desk and taking up all my foot space, but it has to be helpful. And helpful not just in like where are the schools, where's the primary care, the family medical practice, the dentist, et cetera, but helpful in things like, yes, you will need snow tires, and this is when you need to put them on. And, you know, I mean, basic stuff that if you're coming to a cold climate, I mean, we've just experienced this with people coming to the new Vermont State University, and like our former president was like, oh, muddy roads. I don't want to be on muddy roads, because a realtor said, oh yeah, these muddy roads get pretty muddy for, you know, in the spring. And so that's helpful to warn, but then he was like convinced he could not live on a dirt road. And so you know, you've got to have realistic and helpful. And then I've completely lost. Oh yes, the second idea was getting connected with employers who are doing their own recruitment and outreach, getting at that trailing spouse phenomenon of making sure that we know, okay, you've got a new CEO or you've got a new engineer, and he or she has a partner or spouse that needs to, you know, and you need to bring those resources to them as well. And you triggered that thought, Jen, because, you know, hospitals, universities, every employer, they're out recruiting people, but there is that other person that comes along too, and often, and you know, you want to make sure you're providing the necessary resources for the whole family to get introduced too. So
Yeah, I agree, Pat. I think you know, all states are looking for help and have programs, but what can we show as a differentiator that is an add-on, not just to get the people here, but you come here, what else can we do for them to make them want to come here? Because we're going to help them with training, we're going to help them with housing, or we're going to help them with education, or any kind of social services, some that cost money and some that don't. But any help that we can give and make us be superior to other state efforts, I think should be considered.
exactly.
Well, and I'll kind of chime in to say that that's the goal, but I think in a lot of ways we just need we haven't caught up.
Right.
You know, the idea that we'll do better. I mean, so it's still in Vermont, we think of diversity as separate or immigration as separate, where if we are recruiting from anywhere other than Maine, by default, we will be recruiting from a more diverse population. So it's not a choice. It's not, and I think that is something that folks get, you know, and it's the New England, it's not, you know, it's the implicit bias that I think is interwoven in some of our marketing materials, and like structurally, you know, some of the workforce stuff, and we can talk about that, is that like in other states, you can get your credentials tested in any language you speak. And in Vermont, we just don't have policies around things that I joke real places do. You know, places that have had diversity in almost any way beyond Vermont does. they've got really straightforward, like, yeah, sure, you can take your CDL driver's test in Spanish or with a Spanish interpreter, and then you go to ask someone to do that here, and it's like, well, I don't know, we've never done it before, so maybe not. And so I think that that's something that it's like, you know, when we have Tracy Dolan from the refugee coordinator's office on the phone, it's easy, but people trickling in and out through these other programs, they'll bump into these realities in their own way. Like they'll go to their local Department of Labor and see, you know, how those systems may or may not be set up differently or similarly to where they came from. So I think that's, you can't separate it, those concepts from each other.
Yeah. Are there any, and it's okay if folks don't know, but are there any other states or regions that we should be looking at that are doing this really well? I know there's states with high in-migration, but I don't necessarily know if that means their system is really doing that well. But I don't know if there's any thoughts or things folks are, or other just in general things people think we should be looking into.
So the Welcoming America group has done a good job at identifying the areas of a community or region that make it more or less welcoming. And some of those are going to be explicit to immigrants, and I think some of those are really not. And so I think that that is an organization who has at least put a lot of thought into some of these things. Again, with a really specific focus, but yeah. So I think like looking at either their welcoming partners and their highlighted communities, or just, you know, and we're about to join as a member, like I can probably get a copy of like the application to be certified welcoming, right? That's what they do. It's like a B Corps. It's like one of those industry certifications. So it's like you check off enough boxes, you do enough things as a region, and you become certified welcoming. And so that could be a roadmap or a rubric that some of it will make sense to Vermont. And I know, I mean, we haven't joined their thing yet because it doesn't really work for a really small town. And yeah.
And so the other direction from which we've been looking at this is just, I think really to Peter's point, especially, you know, is we can differentiate ourselves by helping people access these opportunities we're talking about. Obviously trying to solve for housing, and that's a biggie, but that's, you know, we'll just take that off the table because there's so much to talk about there. But when it comes to sort of workforce development, just to answer your question, Tori, we have been looking around for places that, for instance, are really blending like ELL with workforce development, you know, training. So like if you are coming here and you are an eager worker who has a background in healthcare, but you need to start getting American credentials, you know, and there are places in the country where they are figuring out how to help people have their English language learning be part of their workforce development, so that they don't have to, you know, they don't have to work as a janitor for 5 years while they perfect their English in order to then start on the long, arduous pathway back to being a nurse, which they were in their home country.
Right.
And that's, you know, I think if you want to attract ambitious, hardworking people to the jobs that we have to give them traction early on. And that's, you know, it can't be like VSAC scholarship. You have to be here for a year already to access that. That money is too important for workforce development for it to have a time delay on it. There has to be some other way, you know, that's just one example, and ELL blended with vocational training is hard. It's not being done well in a lot of places, but, you know, to your question, we're looking at some places in Pennsylvania that are doing workforce development, and at Bucks County Community College is one of sort of the model institutions that's trying to embed English language learning with some of their vocational pathways for the same reasons, you know, to address their own workforce challenges. It's actually not dissimilar in some ways to Vermont. It's a pretty white, you know, pretty conservative formal. You know,
You're
freezing
in the office this week.
You're freezing up, Jen.
It's okay.
Well, Jen
So
brings
a
up a good
state-
point, I think. I'm sorry, Alex, but that also makes me wonder, How are we doing on ELL in the K through 12 system? You know, like, are we able to serve new students coming in that don't speak English? I mean, you know, you bring up an excellent point, I think, Jen, and that, you know, brings me to just what policies we have that both you and Alex have talked about is, are we shooting ourselves in the foot with some of our existing policies and programs by not making them available right away, or that we're putting time delays, whatever, on that? So, yeah.
Yeah. So state funding for ELL is a lagging indicator. So they look at the number of ELL students you had a year or two ago, and that's how they fund it. Now, I think the question we can ask ourselves is, what if on town meeting day, a town said, we're not going to wait for the numbers, we're going to build an ELL budget and try and diversify our student base? I think that's just a different way of thinking about it. And then structurally, from a statewide perspective, Colorado, I believe, just moved their Office of New Americans from their Human Services Agency to their Labor Department. And so that is a really unique, I know very little about the inner workings, but I think it shows that, you know, the assumption that immigrants, they show up and they just need all these services and they should be, yes, the first 2 weeks or 90 days, they may need a lot of health and human services support. But beyond that, they are working Americans, and that their average daily needs are better met by economic development and education and workforce than human services. And so that is a trend we're starting to see. But yeah.
But to be fair, I mean, that 100%, I mean, that's our belief system. We're really believe if you only focus on the crisis and not on the thriving, you get exactly that. You just get more crisis. You just get more people in crisis. And so if we don't invest on that part of the thriving, but here where that's working, and people are working, you know, their average wage is, 18 something an hour right now. I think it's, actually higher at this point, of really new refugees, right? We are daily doing very personal assistance because frankly, the systems don't serve people well when they're economically mobile, right? So our economic services and our social services systems are wonderful and generous and, some of the best in the country for those who are in crisis. But as people start to get into the workforce and are trying to progress, that is where things fall off and fall apart. So I think we really have to think about, again, if thinking about what we want, it's okay to say that we're hoping to attract more people who are economically mobile and can work in the trades and can do jobs, but then we just have to actually do the things that they need.
Well, you asked of examples, Tori. I mean, Vermont knocked it out of the park in the 60s with the Beckoning Country. And that worked really well to bring people. That was our first foray into, we're losing labor force to Connecticut, Massachusetts. And it worked so well that Frank Bryan wrote in his Real Vermonters Don't Milk Goats, is that, well, who do real Vermonters really love to hate? And it was the founders of the Beckoning Country, because I brought too many Flatlanders up. But but we did put a full-scale marketing effort, and it was more just, escape the city, come to beautiful Vermont. And but it shows when we put some muscle behind it, it worked. And it's time to look at a similar kind of thing. So
yeah, good point. In the interest of time, I want to move on to the next milestone. But that's really helpful in terms of next steps on that. I think what Abby and I will do is I've been taking notes on folks, what everyone's been saying, and synthesize that into some key points and some key principles for us to consider to vote on at our next meeting. But I'll kind of put all that together and add any other thoughts, and we can send that back to you all. Switching gears into the New American Support Network. The mile marker is by September 2023. The Relocation and Recruitment Committee will select a vendor to evaluate the infrastructure related to New American Recruitment Support System statewide and support system statewide, approved by the operating committee. So we've drafted an RFP. VDOL's currently editing it. It's going to come back to us in the next couple of days for final review from our office and the governor's office. And I honestly think we'll post before the end of July, but we wanted to give ourselves enough time. So by August 1st, we'll have a RFP posted, and then at the end of August, or September meeting. I will not sadly be here, but you will review the bids that we have for the vendor and make a selection. And then it'll be approved by the operating committee, and then we'll can start the work. So hopefully well before the new year. The vendor, were allocated $200,000 to do this work. So just to give everyone kind of a background, and what we're looking for today is just anything really you feel like we're missing from this, or anything you'd like added to the scope of work and the phases that we have for their work. So pretty standard. They're leading on the data collection, analysis, and presentation. They need to collaborate with us, this committee, to establish the key questions to be answered by the work, review the developed methodology, determine what data should be collected in order to identify what our current New American Sport Network is, which doesn't exist, but what infrastructure exists, and contribute to system identification or improvement, analyze and interpret qualitative and quantitative data as a part of the report, and research best practices and guide recommendations that will meet Vermont's needs. So reviewing other states. So essentially, if you move on, Abby, to the next slide, it's broken down into three phases, which is essentially deep interviews and data collection about what's actually happening in Vermont and what support services we have available that are directly for refugees, asylees, immigrants, but also what support services we have that could be weaved together to support them, and kind of mapping where they are in the state and what connections already exist, what connections don't exist, and figure out pain points and issues with the actual folks on the ground delivering a lot of these services. A review of what other states are doing and provide some recommendations on how we can do this better, how we can coordinate better, and then ultimately negotiating any MOUs or relevant contracts to make the connections formal, and providing any recommendations for further investment in the next not this coming legislative session, the following legislative session, as it relates to supporting refugees, asylees, and immigrants.
So this is specific to new Americans, refugees, asylees, and immigrants, not the general whomever, right?
Yeah. So so that's why I was saying earlier, it's like our work has kind of two tracks. I do believe personally, and I won't be here to see this out, so hopefully someone can let me know, but I believe that a lot of this work will actually help some of the work we're trying to do in general. A lot of this like understanding of the infrastructure and what's going on. But yeah, this is specifically in terms of the coordination of refugees, asylees, and immigrants. And we were very intentional about keeping that really broad, and that we also have a lot of, like, there are folks who want to immigrate to Vermont or to the United States that right now we don't really have any specific way of assisting them, because it's really, they kind of go through the refugee track or the asylee track. And everyone else, it's kind of like, we don't know what to do with them. So that the purpose of this is really to get us all moving in the same direction and start doing this in a more thoughtful and like joined way, I guess. So I'll pause for thoughts from folks.
So the one thing is the phrase "New American" is actually specific in some ways, because many of these folks aren't Americans, and asylum seekers, when they first arrive, may not even have an opportunity to become an American. But if we use the phrase "New Vermonter," that feels different. Also, it's like anyone who steps into the state of Vermont from elsewhere is a New Vermonter. And so I don't know what the right answer is. I think New American is probably good enough, but I think it's something that is worth noting, that I don't know if it's falling out of favor explicitly, but it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, that's what the allocation, that's just what it was passed as by the legislature. So we can't change that piece, but I mean, how we reference our population, I mean, we certainly can say New Vermonter.
I thought I love examples and data, and if added to the RFP could be to identify and celebrate the success stories that we have had with people coming here, and then also explain what went into that success story. So it could be a yardstick for others to look at.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. And I also want to say, I think there has to be explicitly, there has to be some goal setting, because otherwise this is like a lot of plans. That's just like, it's like a phone book, and it's kind of vague booking. You know, I think we have to really, what are we trying to get done? Okay. And how would that get measured? Like, what would success look like? And that really has to get defined kind of early on. This is not meant to be an indictment. You know, this is meant to be a generative document that says, like, here we are and here's where we're trying to go. And I think that I don't think that that's clear enough in the RFP yet. And I would say, including in that goal setting, I think we need to make some suggestions, you know, about like, what are the goals with regards to labor force growth, with regards to not having fewer jobs unfilled, with regards to the economic mobility of those who come here. And back to, I'm sorry, someone just made this point. You know, that we have as an explicit goal for us in our work with refugees, that when we make a system improvement, if and when possible, it's an improvement for all working Vermonters. Like, if we can include the bus routes to help people make it to second shift jobs and third shift jobs where they make more money, those are buses for everybody. That's not just a bus for refugees. And I think that's an excellent principle to really balance, you know, when we focus on people coming into Vermont, making clear that a principle is to make it better for everyone, not just for the newcomer, but often they are the litmus test that shows us how the systems are failing those who are already here or could serve them better. So.
I think that's a great point.
You triggered a thought, unrelated to what you said, Jen, but will this data, and maybe that is one of those quantitative data issues that will be identified, but looking at not just who's coming in and are they adding to the workforce, but what's the retention rate? I mean, are they staying?
Yeah.
How long have they been here? You know, are just trying to get a beat on how many people are working, how long have they been at their current employment? You know, I mean, just trying to get a sense of what's happening. Are they, you know, are the families staying, or, you know, the kids bolting as soon as they turn 18, you know, just some of those kinds of things. Or maybe we don't have enough of a population and time to know that, but that retention piece, I think, is another important data point to get at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Jen, you raise a good point about kind of the explicit goals here. And I think obviously you're just seeing a snippet of the RFP, but I think what we could do, include in the full RFP that we can circulate is, I mean, ultimately our goal is to increase the number of in-migration to the state of Vermont from, I mean, I hesitate to say we want as many refugees as possible, but I don't want there to be refugee crisis that we have to be getting refugees as much as possible. But, you know, that we can be increasing the number of folks who are, you know, coming to this country, choosing Vermont as their home. And there's obviously some ways we can quantify that, first by figuring out what our scope is now, and then, you know, putting some targets to achieve that. But I think you're right in that we could be a little bit more specific in terms of, at the end of all this, what does success look like? And I think building a system that is, you know, able to do that well and efficiently. And then, as Pat said, retain folks here for longer periods of time, so they don't just come here and then leave because, you know, they have family that lives in Ohio. That, I think that's another piece that we could put into here, so it's a little bit more clear.
And not to get too nitty gritty, but like, you know, when, you know, immigrants or refugees, you know, they arrive with nothing, but they are incredibly upwardly mobile. And so things like the benefits cliff, someone who, like, you know, a refugee will experience the benefits cliff on like day 92 that they've been here, right? So you know, we're used to actually an economically stagnant population when it comes to who engages in our services. The folks who are hardest to employ are the ones who are currently employed. When we have a refugee, it's like the moment their English is good enough to step on a manufacturing floor, they're making $22 an hour maybe. And so it shows the transition from a protected status of a person, like funded and supported by the refugee program, to a working class Vermonter, just like straight up. We see some of those gaps. So like, you know, I'm thinking of like, what is the population of new Vermonters in affordable housing? You know, in that, like, are we excluding certain populations who we believe should be in our subsidized housing because they actually are earning higher wages than other folks? Or is the assumption that all refugees need affordable housing when in fact they can actually afford better housing or more expensive housing if it existed? And so those kinds of investments and structures, I think those we can talk more about. Like the questions we ask can help pull on that thread of like, because that's the upward mobility. That's when someone says, yeah, it's been a year and I have gotten 2 promotions. I'm going to bring my cousin here and they're going to bring their cousins here. If someone's stagnant in the economy, even if they love the winter or skiing, you know, they're going to go someplace else. So I think that upward mobility component is as important as like first job, first home stuff.
Right. Especially as it pertains to retention, right? So, you know, having folks be able to build a life here and have career upward mobility and all of that, I think that's a key.
And chain migration. I mean, once you have enough folks of one community who have moved to Vermont, whether we convinced them to or their family did, all of a sudden you have more interpreters who speak that language. You have more businesses who cater to that population. These communities can start beginning to solve problems for themselves when there's that critical mass there. And so, like, you know, the way community picks up the slack of our state across Vermont, you know, it's the benefits of Vermont. Our community picks up the slack when we need to. That happens also in immigrant communities. And so I think looking at that would be cool.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, we have about 2 minutes left. What we will be doing in terms of next steps is circulating, I believe we're able to do this, circulating the RFP when it is final to be posted. We'll let you all know, obviously, when it has been posted, and keep everyone updated on when we'll be reviewing bids. The process for reviewing bids we'll have to go into executive session. No bids can be public until after we've contracted with anyone. So all of that will be confidential information, but obviously for now the RFP will be public. So all of that is fine for you all to know, or for us to do, and as transparent as possible. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then as well for some next steps on the, first milestone on the guiding principles of the relocation recruitment system. And then Abby with all of that, Abby will follow up to schedule our next meeting. But this has been great conversation today. I really appreciate you all so much. And if I don't see you and you don't end up coming to the meeting, I've really enjoyed working with everyone, and I will come back to, you can recruit me back to Vermont after I'm done with law school so I can be a net new worker.
Good luck, Victoria.
You're muted, Pat.
Sorry. We should put some sort of must return caveat when you leave to go to school or something like that. Yeah. Some sort of
Seriously.
contractual relationship requires you to come back.
Of course. All right. Have a great rest of your day, and have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. Bye.